Far above the rolling shoreline of the Indian Ocean, a limestone ridge rises where the coastal plain meets the forest. The stone is pale, fractured, and weathered by long ages of wind and rain. Within its folds lies a narrow cave, not large, but sheltered enough to hold shadows that persist even in the brightness of midday. It is here that archaeologists working in the early 21st century uncover something that changes our understanding of humanity's deep past. For within this small chamber lies evidence of a deliberate act of burial, the oldest yet known on the African continent. The cave today is known as Panga ya Saidi, a Swahili name for the place where stone meets vegetation. Local communities have long known its recesses, but only in recent decades have systematic excavations revealed the extraordinary layers of history sealed within. Sediments here span tens of thousands of years, documenting repeated visits by humans and earlier hominins. Charcoal, stone tools, shells, animal bones, all of these speak to generations who sought shelter, food, or ritual meaning in this cool, echoing space. But among all these finds, one discovery stands apart: the fragile bones of a child, placed with care into a shallow pit 78 millennia ago. When researchers first noticed the small depression in the cave floor, filled with different soil than the surrounding sediment, they suspected disturbance. Careful brushing revealed clusters of bone, so delicate that they crumbled when touched. Specialists stabilized and removed them in blocks of earth, to be studied in laboratories far from the cave. There, under microscopes and scanning machines, the bones resolved into a partial skeleton of a very young individual, 2 to 3 years old, perhaps, at the time of death. The researchers gave the child a name, Mtoto, meaning simply child in Swahili, to remind all who spoke of the remains that this was once a person, not just an object of study. The act of burial itself was subtle but unmistakable. The pit had been dug intentionally into the cave floor. Sediments indicated that the body had been placed on its side, knees drawn slightly toward the chest, the head resting on something soft that has since decayed. Traces of a hollow space around the ribcage suggest that the body was once wrapped in shroud-like material, or perhaps encased in leaves or hide. As time passed, the organic matter vanished, leaving only the imprint in earth and bone. Yet the gesture endures across 78,000 years. A human community chose to place one of their own beneath the ground rather than abandon the body to scavengers or erosion. This choice marks a profound threshold. Burial requires planning, coordination, and a sense of continuity. It implies that death does not end concern for the individual. Some scientists argue that such acts reflect the beginnings of symbolic thought, a recognition of identity that persists even after life ceases. Others caution against too much interpretation, suggesting that burial may have been practical, protecting the living from disease, or simply removing a body from sight. Still, whether symbolic or pragmatic, the act links humans to each other and to place, weaving memory into the landscape. Around the cave, the world of 78,000 years ago was one of shifting environments. Climate oscillated between wetter and drier phases, driven by glacial cycles far to the north. Grasslands expanded and retreated. Forest patches ebbed and flowed. Rivers carved new channels, sometimes swelling with rains, sometimes dwindling. On a planetary scale, ice sheets thickened in the higher latitudes, locking away water and lowering global seas. Coastlines extended outward, creating broad platforms where mangroves and shellfish beds thrived. In this context, coastal caves became havens for human groups who exploited both land and sea. Evidence from the same cave layers reveals shell beads carried from the ocean shore. Some shells are perforated, perhaps strung as ornaments. Pieces of ochre show scraping marks, as if ground to produce pigment. Such items are not necessary for survival, but they reflect choices of expression, of identity, of shared meaning. It is within this cultural framework that Mtoto's burial takes on significance. It is not an isolated act, but part of a broader pattern of emerging symbolic behavior in early Homo sapiens. Yet mysteries remain. No grave goods were found with the child. No ochre dusted the bones. No tools lay nearby. Was this omission deliberate, or simply the result of decay? Perhaps items once accompanied the body but have vanished. Perhaps the community's way of honoring the dead required no objects, only careful placement. Scholars continue to debate. The absence itself tells a story, but one that cannot be concluded with certainty. What endures is the stillness of the site. Within the cave, layers accumulate slowly, each preserving a trace of life long vanished. Charcoal flecks speak of firelight that flickered against stone walls. Shell beads whisper of journeys to the sea and back. Animal bones tell of hunts through shifting grasslands. And in the shallow pit, the child rests, silent witness to all that followed. From this vantage, we glimpse not only an individual life, but a community grappling with the mysteries of mortality long before written words or carved monuments. Step by step, as archaeologists remove the layers of soil, the story becomes clearer. Here is evidence of the earliest known African burial, yet it may not be the first ever practiced elsewhere. Bones are lost to time, consumed by acid soils, washed away by floods, ground to fragments by countless years. The survival of Mtoto's remains is a fragile accident, a narrow window into practices that may once have been widespread. The deep past is filled with such silences. For every bone recovered, countless others vanish unseen. Far away, on other continents, Neanderthals were also burying their dead. In caves in Europe and the Levant, skeletons of adults and children were deliberately placed in pits, sometimes with flowers or tools. The African burial at Pangaya Saidi shows that symbolic care for the dead was not confined to one lineage or one region. It arose in different human populations, perhaps independently, perhaps through shared traditions. This convergence points to something fundamental in the human condition: the recognition of loss, the need to respond, the desire to mark the passage of life into death. In the quiet of the Kenyan coast, surrounded by shifting forests and grasslands, that recognition found form in the burial of a small child. 78,000 years later, the silence still speaks. The limestone cave preserves not only bones, but a gesture, a decision, a moment when community reached beyond the present into memory. And in that act, the first human burial in Africa becomes part of a longer story, stretching across time, across continents, and across the shared humanity that endures. The skeleton within the cave does not tell its story alone. To understand it, archaeologists piece together fragments, comparing each to the fragile remains of other young individuals found across Africa and Eurasia. The child they call Mtoto was between 2 and 3 years of age when death arrived. At that tender stage, bones are thin and porous, more fragile than those of adults, and prone to collapse once buried. Yet here, enough elements remain to reveal posture, orientation, and the intimate gestures that accompanied the act of burial. The small skull fragments, though delicate, confirm a rounded cranium characteristic of Homo sapiens. Teeth erupting in the jaw confirm the age, milk teeth giving way to early molars. Vertebrae and ribs lie collapsed inward, suggesting that the body decayed in place within a hollow space. This detail alone is telling. If the body had been left exposed, bones would scatter. If placed in a pit without wrapping, soil would compress them differently. The preserved hollow indicates that Mtoto's body was covered by something perishable, perhaps a skin shroud, perhaps woven leaves from the coastal forest. As flesh decayed, the wrapping held shape, then vanished, leaving the cavity behind. In studying this burial, researchers use microstratigraphy, analyzing sediments grain by grain. Around the head and shoulders they find subtle discolorations. These point to organic material once present. Soil samples yield chemical traces consistent with plant matter. No fibers survive, but the suggestion is clear: the community took time to prepare, not merely to dig. They placed the child in a bundle, supported the head, then lowered the body into earth. In this tenderness lies evidence of care that transcends mere disposal. At 2 to 3 years, a child has already been part of daily life. In small foraging groups, such children are carried, nursed, taught to grasp tools, watched over by many eyes. The death of such a young one would not pass unnoticed. The burial speaks to collective memory for decision by more than one pair of hands. It is a moment of community expressed in soil. Archaeologists cannot recover the voices of those who stood around the pit, but the arrangement of bones preserves their choices. Around the burial, the cave layers tell of busy lives. Flint and quartz flakes lie scattered, byproducts of tool-making. Shell beads suggest ornamentation and exchange. Fragments of ochre carry grinding marks, perhaps for body painting or symbolic marking. None of these objects were placed directly with the child, yet their presence nearby forms a cultural backdrop. This was not an isolated gesture. It was embedded in a world of shared symbols and practices. Still, many mysteries endure. Was the burial accompanied by spoken words, gestures, or chants? Did mourners paint themselves with ochre before laying the child to rest? Were there offerings of food or water that have since disappeared? Science cannot yet say. What remains are bones, sediments, and chemical traces. Each suggests intention, but intention is not the same as belief. Researchers tread carefully, distinguishing what can be demonstrated from what must remain speculation. The fragile bones themselves provide further insight. Analysis of growth lines in teeth reveals stress events, periods of illness, or nutritional shortage. Mtoto may have suffered repeated fevers or grown during times of scarce food. Life 78,000 years ago was precarious, especially for the young. Yet despite hardship, communities persisted, adapted, and expressed concern for their weakest members. Burial demonstrates that the child was not left to the elements, but given a place within Earth's shelter. From a planetary perspective, this moment coincides with wider dispersals of Homo sapiens. Populations were moving across Africa's diverse landscapes, from savanna to desert to coast. Genetic evidence shows deep lineages spreading, diverging, reconnecting. Each group carried traditions, some of which we glimpse in archaeology. Burial is one of these traditions, appearing sporadically in Africa, in the Levant, and among Neanderthals in Europe. Whether learned independently or transmitted through contact, the pattern suggests that by this time, humans of various kinds recognize significance in the treatment of the dead. The site's location also matters. From the cave mouth, one sees forest slopes rolling downward to the Indian Ocean. Beyond lies a horizon that stretches without end. That ocean was lower in Mtoto's day, with coastlines extending far beyond the modern beach. Tidal flats, lagoons, and mangroves offered rich resources. Communities here lived at a crossroads, land abundant with game, sea abundant with fish, and caves offering shelter. It is fitting that a burial occurred here, where daily life intersected with enduring stone and timeless waves. Archaeologists remind us that most burials do not survive. Soil chemistry dissolves bone, animals scatter remains, erosion erases pits. The survival of Mtoto's skeleton is extraordinary luck. It gives us a single data point within a vast unknown. Were children often buried? Were adults interred as well? How many rituals have left no trace? Each question highlights the silence of deep time. What we hold in hand is fragile, partial, and precious. Still, every fragment enriches understanding. Mtoto's burial anchors symbolic behavior firmly in Africa, not only in Eurasia. It demonstrates that Homo sapiens communities on the continent were already developing practices of care and memory long before the great migrations outward. It challenges older narratives that placed symbolic culture mainly in Europe. Here, in coastal Kenya, we see that the roots run deeper and wider. The story of Mtoto also connects with broader studies of childhood in prehistory. For decades, archaeology focused mainly on adults, hunters, toolmakers, leaders. Only recently have scholars turned attention to children, who form a large part of any community. Children embody learning, play, transmission of knowledge. Their presence shapes group survival. Burial of a child reminds us that even in deep time, childhood mattered, both socially and emotionally. There is another mystery. No other burials of similar age are yet found nearby. Was this cave unique in receiving such treatment? Did the group move on, never to return? Or do other graves lie hidden beneath sediments still unexcavated? Future research may answer, but for now the silence holds. The pit in Pangayasaidi stands alone, a solitary testimony. Step by step, scientists reconstruct the moment. First, the child is wrapped, head supported, body curled. Then hands dig a pit in the cave floor. The child is lowered, earth replaced, perhaps smoothed. Time passes. Fires burn nearby. Generations come and go. Sediment thickens, sealing the grave in stillness. Tens of millennia later, careful excavation reveals it once more. The presence of Mtoto in this limestone hollow bridges vast scales of time. It ties together family care, community decision, cultural practice, and planetary change. It situates Homo sapiens not only as toolmakers and travelers, but as mourners who marked death with deliberate gesture. In the measured silence of this act, a thread of humanity stretches unbroken from a child laid to rest 78,000 years ago to the living world that now remembers. 78,000 years ago, the landscapes around the limestone cave were in motion, shaped by cycles of climate that pulsed across continents. This was a time within the Middle Stone Age when human groups were learning to navigate environments that could change from lush to barren, within a single lifetime. The East African coast, where the cave lies, was not fixed in one form. It breathed in rhythms of moisture and drought, greenness and dryness, abundance and scarcity. To understand the burial, one must also imagine the world that surrounded it, a mosaic of habitat stretching from savanna grasslands to patches of dense forest, and beyond them, to the endless reach of the Indian Ocean. At the broadest scale, the Earth itself was entering one of the long glacial episodes of the Pleistocene. Far to the north, ice sheets thickened over Eurasia, locking water into frozen reservoirs. As glaciers expanded, sea levels fell, exposing wide coastal shelves. These new landscapes offered pathways for both animals and humans. Yet in East Africa, the influence of glaciers was indirect. What mattered here was rainfall, carried by monsoons that shifted with planetary cycles of tilt and orbit. When rains came strong, rivers swelled, lakes filled, and forests expanded. When the rains weakened, grasslands withered, soils cracked, and dust storms swept the horizon. Around Pangaya Saidi, this oscillation created a patchwork environment. On one slope, open grasslands stretched where antelope grazed. On another, clusters of trees held shade, fruits, and birds. Between them, clearings revealed traces of fire, whether natural or set by human hand. Such a shifting landscape required flexibility. Groups that hunted gazelle one season might turn to shellfish and crabs the next, or gather wild yams and tubers in times of drought. It was a world of constant adaptation, where survival depended on recognizing subtle changes in vegetation, rainfall, and animal movement. Sediment cores taken from ancient lakes near the region reveal layers of pollen, charcoal, and silt. These microscopic records show swings between wetter phases, when grass pollen decreased and forest species thrived, and drier phases, when savanna pollen dominated the charcoal layers, hint at frequent fire, some natural, others likely controlled by humans to open clearings or drive animals. Such environmental archives provide the backdrop for the community that buried Mtoto. They remind us that the cave was not isolated, but part of a living, shifting ecosystem influenced by forces both local and global. In wetter interval, the coast would have been a green belt dotted with rivers, lagoons, and wetlands. Human groups would find plentiful game, abundant shellfish, and edible plants. Such times favored growth of population, movement across wider ranges, and perhaps experimentation with new practices. In drier intervals, resources shrank, and groups may have drawn together for mutual support. The burial of a child in such a context might reflect not only personal loss but also a community's resilience, marking death with continuity, even when survival was uncertain. One lesser-known detail comes from isotopic studies of animal remains in the region. Antelope bones show chemical signatures of shifting diets, switching from browsing in wooded areas to grazing in open grasslands. This reflects the same environmental oscillations recorded in pollen cores. Such evidence shows how closely animals, and by extension humans, were bound to the rhythms of climate. When antelope changed diet, hunters changed strategies. When forests contracted, gatherers turned to different roots and fruits. Flexibility was the rule of life. The mystery, however, lies in how communities anticipated these shifts. Did they track stars or seasonal winds? Did oral traditions guide them across years of scarcity? Archaeology offers only fragments. Stone tools show continuity of tradition, but also subtle changes in design, new ways of shaping blades, new choices of raw material. These may reflect adaptation to changing environments or connections with other groups. Yet the deeper logic of decision-making, the knowledge systems passed from elders to youth, remain largely invisible. On a planetary scale, these changes were linked to cycles known as Milankovitch rhythms, variations in Earth's orbit, tilt and wobble. These slow pulses altered the distribution of sunlight, shifting rainfall belts across Africa every 10 or 20,000 years. The monsoon strengthened or weakened. For human groups, these shifts were profound. Lakes like Turkana or Victoria rose and fell dramatically. Green corridors opened across deserts, then closed again. Such corridors may have enabled migrations outward, carrying Homo sapiens across Arabia and into Asia. The burial at Panga Ya Saidi, therefore, belongs to a world both local and global, where the fate of a single community was tied to the dance of planets around the sun. Step by step, archaeologists reconstruct these environments using multiple lines of evidence. Pollen charts tell of vegetation. Stable isotopes in soil carbonate speak of rainfall. Animal remains reveal shifts in prey. Together, these form a tapestry that allows us to imagine the daily lives of people along the coast. We picture families moving between shoreline and upland, collecting mollusks, cracking shells with stone, carrying baskets of tubers, sharing fire under trees. Within such cycles of abundance and scarcity, life and death interwove. The burial of Mtoto occurred not in isolation, but within a community embedded deeply in ecological rhythms. The significance of this setting is profound. Burial may have been a way of anchoring memory in a shifting world. When landscapes changed, when forests receded, when lagoons dried, placing a body in the ground gave permanence. The cave became a marker, a site to which memory could return. Even if groups moved on, the grave endured. Silent against the tides of climate, it suggests that in an uncertain environment, people sought stability not only through tools and food, but through ritualized acts of continuity. One can imagine the view outward from the cave mouth. To the east, the ocean stretched toward unseen islands and distant lands. To the west, hills rolled into savanna, dotted with herds and streams. Above, skies shifted with monsoon clouds or baked under relentless sun. Each of these elements shaped existence, and each found its way, indirectly, into the meaning of a child's burial. The earth itself, unstable yet enduring, became the medium of remembrance. Today, researchers continue to probe this period with ever finer methods. Ancient DNA from sediments may soon reveal the genetic traces of people who lived here. Microscopic residues may show which plants they used for wrapping or bedding. But already, the context is clear. A community adapting to cycles of climate, balancing between abundance and scarcity, anchoring memory in the permanence of stone. The burial at Panga Ya Saidi is not only an event but also a window into an environment. It shows that humanity's earliest symbolic acts were intertwined with landscapes in flux. Death and memory were marked not against a static background, but within a world of shifting grasslands, rising and falling seas, and planetary rhythms larger than any human life. To bury a child here was to inscribe meaning in a changing earth, to fix remembrance in a world that never stood still. Along the East African coast, where the limestone cave lay hidden, life was sustained by a delicate balance between land and sea. Here, Small communities of Homo sapiens found the means to endure, drawing on both terrestrial and marine resources. Archaeological layers at Panga ya Saidi and nearby sites reveal the traces of their daily existence: shell fragments from the shoreline, bones of hunted antelope, flakes of stone struck into sharp blades. Each remnant is a clue, small in itself, yet together they illuminate how early humans organized life in a landscape that offered both hardship and abundance. These were communities of foragers. Their groups were small, perhaps no more than a few dozen people bound by kinship and shared labor, and they did not build permanent villages, nor did they cultivate fields. Instead, they moved seasonally, adjusting to where resources were most plentiful. Along the coast, shellfish beds provided reliable nutrition, available even when game was scarce. Women, men, and children alike may have gathered mollusks during low tide, prying limpets from rocks, collecting oysters, and cracking open clams. The fragments of these shells, found far inland within caves, suggest that harvests were carried back for cooking and sharing. From the surrounding savannas, hunters brought down small and medium-sized game. Bones of duiker, bushbuck, and larger antelope appear in cave deposits. These animals required skill to track and patience to kill. Hunters likely used spears tipped with stone points, hafted carefully onto wooden shafts with resin and fiber. The tools, preserved as flakes and cores, bear microscopic wear that testifies to their function. Cut marks on bones confirm butchery, the stripping of flesh, the breaking of long bones for marrow. Fire traces within the caves show where meat was roasted, the flames reflecting from limestone walls. Plant foods also sustained these groups, though their traces are less visible. Tubers and roots would have been dug with pointed sticks, leaves and fruits collected as they ripened in shifting forests. Recent studies of microscopic residues on stone tools from similar sites in Africa reveal starch grains, evidence that roots were sliced or ground long before the invention of agriculture. Such resources would have been vital in dry seasons, when hunting faltered. In this way, communities wove together land and sea, animal and plant, into a flexible strategy that allowed persistence across thousands of years. The presence of shell beads at Panga ya Saidi tells of more than subsistence. These small, perforated shells, carried inland from the shore, suggest adornment. They may have been strung on fiber cords, worn as necklaces or anklets, exchanged between groups as tokens of identity. To gather shells not for food but for ornament marks a step into symbolism, a recognition that life requires not only sustenance but meaning. Beads endure longer than words, yet they too speak of social ties. Perhaps they signaled membership in a group or served as gifts in marriage alliances. Their presence beside tools and bones reminds us that foragers were not only surviving, but expressing, remembering, and connecting. Daily life must have been shaped by rhythm. Morning may have been devoted to gathering shellfish, afternoon to hunting or tool-making, evening to fires where food was shared and stories told. Children played near the cave mouth, imitating the motions of adults, learning to shape flakes from stone, to recognize edible plants, to follow animal tracks. Elders passed knowledge, guiding younger hands in the skills that ensured survival. In such a setting, the death of a child like Mtoto was not merely a personal loss, but a disruption in the cycle of teaching and learning, felt by all. One lesser-known detail comes from microscopic analysis of stone tools found in the cave. Some flakes bear traces of plant resins, suggesting they were hafted to wooden handles. This shows not only ingenuity but foresight, as collecting resin requires planning. To fix stone into wood is to extend human capability, transforming brittle flakes into durable spears. Such composite tools reflect the ingenuity of communities that lived in shifting environments. They also show the transmission of skill, for such techniques are learned, taught, and remembered across generations. Yet mysteries remain. How did groups divide labor? Were hunting and gathering sharply distinguished by gender, or more fluid in practice? Did communities exchange resources with neighbors, or remain isolated? The archaeological record is silent on such details. Shell beads hint at contact beyond immediate groups, but how far networks extended is unclear. Some scholars argue for long-distance connections along the coast, linking communities across hundreds of kilometers. Others caution that beads may simply mark local expression. In this uncertainty lies the challenge of prehistory. To infer lifeways from fragments, to balance imagination with evidence. On a planetary scale, these communities were part of broader movements of Homo sapiens across Africa. Genetic studies suggest that populations along the coast contributed to lineages that later spread northward, out of Africa. The strategies developed here, flexible diets, symbolic expression, adaptation to shifting climates, were part of the toolkit that enabled global dispersal. When groups later crossed into Arabia and beyond, they carried with them the skills honed in places like Pangaya Saidi. Thus, the daily acts of gathering, hunting, and ornament-making echo far beyond their immediate context, shaping the future of humanity. The setting itself carried meaning. From the cave mouth, the ocean's horizon stretched endlessly. The rhythm of tides governed gathering. The cries of seabirds marked shifts of season. Inland, the savanna echoed with antelope hooves and predator calls. Between these worlds, humans moved fluidly, weaving land and sea into their identity. The cave offered more than shelter. It was a vantage point from which life's patterns could be observed and remembered. Perhaps this is why it was chosen as a burial place, anchoring community memory in stone that endured through millennia. In this context, the burial of Mtoto gains deeper resonance. The child's life unfolded within rhythms of foraging, hunting, and gathering. Their death was marked by deliberate placement in the earth, a gesture shaped by the same community that shared shellfish harvests, hunted gazelle, and strung beads. To bury was not an isolated act, but part of a continuum of meaning woven through daily survival. It tied together subsistence and symbolism, ensuring that even in death, the child remained part of the community's enduring story. Step by step, archaeologists uncover these details: shells carried from shore, bones cracked for marrow, resins binding stone to wood. Each fragment builds a picture of communities who thrived along shifting coasts, adapting to cycles of climate, drawing strength from cooperation. Their world was not static, but they endured, leaving behind traces that still speak. And in the stillness of the cave, the story of their lives surrounds the silence of the child's grave, uniting subsistence, symbolism, and memory in one enduring place. The discovery of the child in Pangaya Saidi cave rests not only on bones but also on subtler traces, microscopic sediments, soil chemistry, and faint imprints in earth. These quiet signals reveal gestures otherwise lost. They tell how the burial was made and how the living prepared a resting place. Unlike tools of stone or ornaments of shell, The grave was not crafted to last. It was shaped in perishable materials, wraps, bedding, plant matter that vanished long ago. Yet their presence lingers as shadows in soil. To follow them is to glimpse a community's intent carried across 78,000 years. When archaeologists excavated the shallow pit, they noticed differences in color and texture of surrounding earth. The fill was looser, its grains sorted differently, as if disturbed by digging. Within it, voids had formed where organic material once lay. Around the ribs and pelvis, sediments sloped inward, suggesting the collapse of a hollow cavity. This cavity likely marked where the torso had once rested, enclosed in a bundle or shroud. As the body decayed, wrapping held space, then disintegrated, leaving bones to fall in place. The imprint of absence is evidence of presence. The child's head provided another clue. It tilted forward, chin resting near chest, yet not forced by compression. Instead, this posture indicated support, as though the head had lain on a pillow of perishable matter, perhaps leaves, perhaps soft grass. Soil chemistry near the skull showed elevated levels of organic compounds, reinforcing the idea of bedding. The care implied is striking. It suggests that mourners not only lowered the child into earth, but arranged the body with comfort in mind, providing support even in death. Such gestures may seem small, but they transform the meaning of the burial. To dig a pit is one act, to wrap, position, and cushion is another. These details indicate deliberate attention, not mere disposal. They suggest that the body was not simply hidden from sight, but given rest with intention. Scholars interpret this as symbolic behavior, the recognition that individuals hold identity beyond life, deserving of careful treatment. Whether or not mourners spoke words or gestures, the act of wrapping and placing carries meaning that echoes across millennia. One lesser-known detail comes from microscopic soil samples, traces of red particles, possibly ochre, though too few to confirm ritual use. If ochre was present, it may have stained the wrapping or been sprinkled lightly. Elsewhere in Africa, ochre use appears as pigment for skin, tools, or symbolic art. Its presence here would link burial to wider traditions of marking with color. Yet because evidence is faint, the question remains unresolved. Did the mourners use pigment to signify, or are the particles simply natural? This ambiguity is part of the mystery, reminding us that evidence is fragile and interpretation cautious. The burial also reflects knowledge of decay. To wrap a body slows disarticulation, keeping bones aligned. To place it carefully avoids scattering by animals or erosion. These practices may have been learned through observation of what happens to bodies left exposed. Communities may have seen how scavengers scatter remains, how bones bleach in sun, how flesh disappears. Burial, then, was both practical and symbolic. It preserved integrity while expressing care. Whether intention leaned more toward hygiene or toward memory is uncertain, but the gestures themselves testify to foresight. On a broader scale, such gestures align with practices seen in Neanderthal sites. In Shanidar Cave in Iraq, a Neanderthal body lay surrounded by pollen, interpreted by some as evidence of flowers placed with the dead. In La Chapelle-aux-Saints in France, a pit held skeletal remains deliberately arranged. Comparisons highlight convergences between human populations. Burial may not have been unique to Homo sapiens, but a shared capacity among several human lineages. Yet Mtoto's grave is distinct, the oldest deliberate burial known in Africa, the homeland of our species. It anchors symbolic care firmly within the continent. Planetary rhythms frame this act. Around 78,000 years ago, glacial cycles lowered seas and altered rainfall. Landscapes shifted, populations moved, resources fluctuated. Against such instability, burial created a fixed point. It gave continuity in a world of change. A cave floor, once disturbed, became a marker. Even if groups moved on, the grave remained, silent and enduring. In this way, burial connected the fleeting life of a child with the vast stability of earth and stone. It inscribed memory against planetary flux. Mystery persists. Was Mtoto's burial unique, or part of a broader tradition across Africa? Few other burials of similar age are known on the continent, but this may reflect preservation rather than absence. Acid soils dissolve bone, tropical rains erode sediments, scavengers scatter remains. It is possible that many other burials once existed but have vanished. Mtoto may represent a broader practice, glimpsed only through rare survival. If so, then communities across Africa may have been burying their dead long before evidence allows us to see. Archaeologists emphasize the delicacy of such discoveries. The bones of a 2-year-old are thinner than parchment, fragile as dust. To recover them required removing blocks of sediment intact, transporting them to laboratories, and scanning them with micro-CT imaging. In digital reconstructions, posture and position were revealed without destroying the specimen. These technologies allow modern science to read traces invisible to the naked eye. Through them, gestures of long ago become legible again, a head cradled, a body wrapped, a pit carefully filled. One detail especially moves researchers, the articulation of the lower limbs. The knees are drawn slightly toward the chest, a posture that could result from wrapping in a flexed position. Such positioning is common in early burials, both of Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. Some interpret it as symbolic, perhaps resembling fetal posture, suggesting return to earth as to womb. Others argue it is simply practical, easier to wrap and fit into shallow pits. The true meaning is unknown, but the similarity across regions hints at shared understandings, whether symbolic or functional. From the perspective of daily life, these gestures required cooperation. Digging a pit in cave sediments takes effort. Wrapping a body requires material and skill. Supporting the head demands thought. These tasks imply a group, not an individual. They suggest shared mourning, collective labor, and agreement on how to treat the dead. Burial therefore reflects not only care for the child, but cohesion within the community. It demonstrates that symbolic acts were embedded in social structures, shaping bonds among the living. Looking outward, such cohesion was crucial for survival in shifting environments. Climate could render regions barren, forcing groups to move or adapt. Communities with strong bonds were more resilient. Burial, by reinforcing memory and identity, may have strengthened those bonds. It linked individuals to place, the dead to the living, the present to continuity. Thus, symbolic acts had practical consequences. They nurtured resilience against planetary change. In the cave's stillness today, the pit remains faint, the bones delicate. Yet from these traces, an entire web of meaning unfolds. The hollow around the ribs tells of wrapping. The tilt of the skull tells of support. Soil chemistry hints at organic bedding. Each detail adds a thread, weaving a picture of community intent. Though faint, the signals combine into clarity. This was not chance, but choice. The community buried their child with care. Step by step, science brings these gestures to light. Sediments are sifted, particles measured, bones scanned. From such precision arises a narrative of meaning. It is not dramatic, not embellished, but steady, grounded in evidence. It tells of people who lived in landscapes of change, who foraged and hunted, who adorned themselves with shells, and who, when faced with death, turned to soil with intention. In this stillness, the subtle signs of burial speak across time, connecting us with those who lived and cared 78,000 years ago. Around the burial site in Pangaya Saidi, archaeologists discovered not only bones and sediments, but also artifacts that point to a broader world of symbolism. Among the most striking were shells carried from the Indian Ocean, some pierced with small holes as if for threading. Others were found far from their natural habitat, carried inland over many kilometers. Alongside these lay fragments of ochre, streaked with scrape marks, and tiny beads fashioned by human hands. Together, they reveal that early communities were not merely surviving, but experimenting with forms of meaning that extended beyond daily subsistence. The shells are especially telling. Marine mollusks such as Nasarius are abundant along the East African coast, yet their perforated forms appear even in caves far inland. At Pangaya Saidi, they testify to journeys between shore and upland, and perhaps to exchange between groups. When strung together, the shells would have glistened in sunlight, clicking softly as they moved. They may have been worn on the body, sewn onto clothing, or tied into hair. Each possibility points to self-presentation, to a desire to signal something to others. Ornamentation transforms the body into a canvas, carrying messages of identity, kinship, or status. Ochre fragments deepen this picture. Some pieces were ground smooth, as if rubbed against stone to produce powder. Such powder could be mixed with water or fat to create pigment, whether smeared on skin, objects, or cave walls. The color carried significance. Across Africa, ochre appears repeatedly in Middle Stone Age sites, sometimes in quantities too large to dismiss as mere utilitarian use. The red of ochre may have symbolized blood, life, or transformation, though its exact meaning remains elusive. Its presence near Mtoto's burial suggests that pigment formed part of the symbolic world in which burial took place. Beads offer another dimension, tiny, laboriously crafted. They required skill and patience to produce. The act of perforating shells with stone tools demonstrates precision and persistence. Wearing beads required shared conventions. Only if others recognized their meaning would ornament serve as communication. Thus, beads signal not only artistry but social networks. They may have traveled as gifts or tokens, linking groups across landscapes. In their persistence, beads are among the earliest durable expressions of symbolic thought. One lesser-known detail comes from residue analysis of ochre fragments at similar sites. Some samples contain traces of resin, suggesting that ochre may have been mixed into adhesives for hafting tools. If so, ochre had both symbolic and practical uses. Its red color may have been valued aesthetically, but it also strengthened glues, binding stone to wood. Such dual functions blur categories. Pigment could serve survival as well as symbolism. This complexity reflects the ingenuity of early humans, who found multiple uses for the same material. Mystery surrounds the connection between these objects and burial. Were shells and ochre used in funerary contexts at Pangaya Saidi? The child's grave contained no beads or pigments directly, only faint hints in soil. Some scholars suggest that ornament and burial were linked, symbols marking both life and death. Others caution that proximity in sediments does not prove association. Perhaps shells and ochre were simply part of daily life, present in the cave when burial occurred. The absence of direct offerings leaves the question open. Still, their presence nearby enriches the cultural backdrop, showing that this was a community familiar with symbolic materials. Planetary rhythms shaped the context of this symbolism. As glaciers grew in distant latitudes, coastlines extended, revealing tidal flats rich in shells. People collected mollusks for food and beads alike, carrying them inland as symbols of connection to the sea. In wetter phases, rivers swelled, linking coast to interior, facilitating movement of people and objects. In drier phases, such connections may have stretched thinner, making ornaments all the more valuable as signs of alliance. Thus the shells and beads found in caves are not only artifacts but markers of ecological and social networks, bridging land, sea, and climate. The significance of symbolism is profound. To craft beads, to grind ochre, to carry shells inland, these are acts not required for survival. They indicate imagination, identity, and shared meaning. Some scholars see them as milestones in the emergence of modern human behavior. Others caution that symbolism may have deeper roots, present even in earlier hominins. Neanderthal sites, for example, have yielded ochre and pierced objects as well. Yet at Panga ya Saidi, the combination of beads, pigment, and burial anchors, symbolic expression, firmly in Africa, in the homeland of our species. Daily life would have woven symbolism into practice. Beads may have jingled as people walked, marking rhythm in dance or ceremony. Ochre may have colored skin during rituals or served as sunscreen in harsh sun. Shells may have passed between groups as tokens of trust. Children, watching elders wear ornaments, would have learned their meanings, inheriting identity through material signs. In this way, symbolism linked generations, embedding memory in objects as well as soil. The burial of Mtoto fits within this world. Even without beads or pigment placed directly in the grave, the act of burial itself was symbolic. It marked a threshold, transforming death into continuity. The presence of symbolic materials in the same cave reinforces the sense that community life included more than practical subsistence. People were experimenting with meaning, shaping identity, and extending care into realms beyond survival. The child's burial, while framed by beads and ochre nearby, becomes part of this wider fabric. One unresolved question is whether symbolism arose suddenly or gradually. Some researchers argue for a cultural explosion around 70 to 80,000 years ago, when beads, ochre, and burials appear together. Others see a slower evolution, with symbolic practices emerging piecemeal, varying across regions. The evidence at Panga ya Saidi supports the latter view. Symbolic items appear sporadically over long sequences, woven into daily life rather than erupting at once. This pattern suggests resilience and continuity, a steady exploration of meaning over time. From a planetary perspective, symbolism links humans to larger cycles. Beads carry echoes of tides and shells. Ochre reflects minerals formed deep in Earth's crust. Burial inscribes memory in soil shaped by climate and erosion. Each act connects human life to geology, ocean, and atmosphere. Symbolism thus emerges not as abstraction, but as dialogue with environment. It reflects how communities situated themselves within a world of shifting climates and enduring landscapes. In the cave's silence today, the beads and ochre fragments remain as small, enduring witnesses. They lie beside stone flakes and animal bones, fragments of daily life, yet their significance transcends function. They tell of imagination, of identity, of networks of exchange. They remind us that even 78,000 years ago, humans were shaping meaning as well as tools. The child's burial belongs within this symbolic landscape, a gesture of care amid a world already filled with symbols. Step by step, archaeologists reconstruct this symbolic world. They catalogue beads, trace ochre marks, map shell origins. Each detail adds depth to the picture of early Homo sapiens in Africa, foragers who hunted and gathered, but who also adorned, painted, and buried. In their gestures we see the roots of art, ritual, and identity. The silence of the cave holds not only bones, but echoes of symbols, resonating across tens of millennia. While life unfolded along the East African coast, other human groups were already moving outward, tracing paths beyond the continent. Around the time of Mtoto's burial, Homo sapiens had begun to spread northward through the Nile Valley and eastward across the Arabian Peninsula. These journeys did not happen once but many times, responding to cycles of climate that opened and closed corridors of movement. Some groups reached new lands and persisted, others disappeared, leaving only faint genetic echoes. The burial at Panga Yasaidi belongs within this broader story of dispersal, for the same flexibility and symbolism that marked life on the coast also prepared communities for journeys across unfamiliar landscapes. Archaeological evidence in Arabia supports this picture. In caves at sites such as Jebel Fire and open-air deposits in the Nefud Desert, stone tools appear that resemble African traditions of the Middle Stone Age. These tools, dated to roughly the same period as Mtoto's burial, suggest that small groups crossed the Red Sea or the Sinai to enter new territories. Some carried bifacial points, others used flake-based technologies, but all reveal the adaptability of Homo sapiens. Such migrations were likely episodic, tied to pulses of rainfall that turned deserts into grasslands, dotted with lakes and rivers. When climate shifted back to dryness, groups retreated or perished. Genetic studies support repeated dispersals. Some lineages within modern humans trace back to populations that left Africa before the Great Expansion around 60 to 70,000 years ago. These early waves may have reached Arabia or even South Asia, but left little trace in present-day populations. Others, however, contributed fragments of DNA still carried by people today. These genetic signals confirm that the story of dispersal was complex, not one migration, but many attempts, some ending, some enduring. The relationship between these outward-moving groups and communities that remained in Africa is a matter of ongoing research. Did they exchange genes and ideas across long distances, or remain isolated? The discovery of ornaments such as shell beads in both Africa and Arabia raises the possibility of shared traditions. Yet similarities may also reflect convergence. Independent solutions to similar needs for identity and communication. The truth may lie in a mixture of both: contact when corridors were open, isolation when climates closed them again. One lesser-known detail comes from sites in Arabia where fossilized footprints of humans appear beside those of elephants, camels, and antelope. These prints, preserved in ancient lake beds, date to around the same era as Mtoto's burial. They offer a rare glimpse of movement, people walking across wet ground, leaving behind impressions that endured for tens of millennia. The footprints confirm that humans were present far from Africa earlier than once thought, taking advantage of humid phases that transformed deserts into habitable zones. Such direct traces of steps connect to the broader narrative of dispersal, showing that the urge to move was already expressed. Mysteries remain about how deliberate these dispersals were. Did groups set out intentionally to find new lands, or did they simply follow animals and water sources, gradually extending ranges until they crossed thresholds? Some scholars suggest that the concept of migration as we imagine it, planned journeys with destinations, may not apply to deep prehistory. Instead, movements may have been incremental, embedded in daily survival. Over generations, small shifts accumulated into large-scale dispersals. Whether intentional or not, the outcome was the same. Homo sapiens expanded into landscapes far from ancestral homelands. Planetary changes provided both opportunity and risk. During humid phases, the Sahara greened, dotted with lakes and rivers. Corridors opened from sub-Saharan Africa into North Africa and Arabia. When dryness returned, those corridors closed, stranding or extinguishing populations. Sea levels also shifted. At times of lower seas, crossings into Arabia were shorter, exposing land bridges or narrowing straits. Such conditions shaped when and how humans could move. The timing of Mtoto's burial aligns with one of these windows, when wetter climates facilitated expansion beyond Africa. From a cultural perspective, the skills and symbols evident in Pangaya Saidi likely accompanied these journeys. The capacity to adapt diets, to cooperate in foraging, to use ornaments for social identity, all were essential for survival in new lands. A group carrying beads and ochre could recognize each other, signal affiliation, and maintain cohesion far from familiar landscapes. Burial practices may have traveled too, marking memory even in foreign soils. Though direct evidence outside Africa is sparse, the symbolic behaviors rooted in African communities shaped how humans engaged with the world beyond. The comparisons with Neanderthals and Denisovans add another layer. As Homo sapiens spread outward, they encountered other human lineages already established in Eurasia. Genetic evidence shows interbreeding with both Neanderthals and Denisovans, events that left lasting marks in our DNA. Such encounters may have occurred soon after dispersal, perhaps even within Arabia. Thus, the burial of Mtoto, while deeply local, belongs within a global context of meeting, mixing, and exchanging. The community that laid a child to rest on the East African coast was part of a species beginning to weave itself into a wider human tapestry. One unresolved question is whether outward-moving groups carried with them the full range of symbolic practices seen in Africa, or whether some traditions were lost and reinvented. For instance, beads and ochre appear sporadically in Arabian sites, but not as consistently as in African ones. This may reflect preservation bias, or it may indicate selective transmission. Symbolism may have been fragile, requiring reinforcement through community memory. If so, the burial at Pangaya Saidi gains additional weight. It demonstrates that symbolic acts were already well established before dispersal, forming a foundation for traditions that spread across continents. On the scale of Earth itself, these dispersals were part of a broader pattern of species movement during glacial cycles. Animals, too, shifted ranges, following vegetation belts as climates changed. Elephants roamed into Arabia, hippos into the Levant, antelope across deserts. Humans moved among them, responding to the same forces. The burial of Mtoto therefore sits within a planetary web of migration, part of a dance of life responding to orbital rhythms. To picture the child in the cave is to picture at the same time herds crossing savannas, rivers filling and drying, coastlines advancing and retreating. From the cave mouth at Pangaya Saidi, the ocean horizon suggested vastness. Beyond it lay unseen lands that some groups would one day reach. Inland, corridors opened northward, carrying others into deserts that sometimes bloomed green. The burial anchors us in place, but dispersal reminds us of movement. Together they define the human condition, rooted in memory, yet restless toward horizons. Step by step, archaeology pieces together this story: stone tools in Arabia, footprints in lake beds, genes in modern populations, all combine to show that by the time of Mtoto's burial, humans were already part of a continental drama of expansion. The child's grave is a local moment, but within it echoes a global process. To care for the dead while moving across landscapes is to hold both memory and migration together. And so the first known African burial speaks not only of loss but of continuity within a species that was already beginning to cross the world. The world that surrounded the burial at Pangaya Saidi was not shaped only by local rivers and forests. It was governed by planetary rhythms of climate, the long cycles of the Pleistocene that dictated when grasslands flourished and when deserts spread. To understand the silence of the grave, one must also listen to the larger pulse of ice, water, and wind that set the stage for human life 78,000 years ago. These rhythms, vast and impersonal, determined whether communities thrived or suffered, whether migration routes opened or closed, whether seas rose or fell. At this time, Earth was within one of its glacial phases. Massive ice sheets stretched across northern continents, reflecting sunlight back into space. Temperatures were lower worldwide, though the tropics remained warm enough for human habitation. Yet even far from the poles, the consequences were profound. With water locked into ice, sea levels fell by tens of meters. The Indian Ocean coastline extended outward, exposing wide shelves and tidal flats. Where modern waters now crash, ancient humans walked across exposed land, collecting shellfish and seaweed from areas long since drowned. These changes shaped the geography of East Africa. Rivers carved deeper channels, fed by seasonal rains that waxed and waned with monsoon cycles. Lakes swelled in humid periods, then shrank dramatically in arid ones. Sediments from Lake Malawi and Lake Tanganyika record these oscillations, layer upon layer of mud capturing pollen, charcoal, and dust. Each band tells of shifting vegetation, forests advancing during wetter times, grasslands dominating in drier ones. These shifts directly affected communities along the coast, determining where animals grazed, where plants could be gathered, where fresh water could be found. For Homo sapien, survival meant adaptation to this variability. Groups living near Pangaya Saidi had to adjust strategies constantly. In wetter years, game was plentiful, rivers steady, and fruits abundant. In drier years, they turned more to shellfish, roots, and stored resources. Such flexibility was crucial, for climate swings could occur within a few generations, short enough to affect memory, long enough to redefine landscapes. Oral traditions may have carried knowledge of where to find water, when to expect drought, how to move when resources failed. Though unrecorded, such wisdom was part of the cultural toolkit that allowed survival in unstable environments. On a planetary scale, these changes were driven by Earth's orbital variations, cycles of tilt, wobble, and orbit known as Milankovitch cycles. Every 20 to 40,000 years, these shifts altered the intensity and distribution of sunlight across latitudes. Monsoons strengthened or weakened accordingly, pulling rainfall belts north or south. For Africa, this meant alternating green and arid phases, the so-called Green Sahara episodes, when grasslands spread across what is now desert. The burial at Pangaya Saidi occurred during one such humid interval when expanded vegetation supported wider human presence. These orbital rhythms, written in ice cores and marine sediments, governed the opportunities available to early humans. One lesser-known detail comes from speleothems, stalagmites and stalactites in East African caves. Their growth rings preserve oxygen isotopes that record ancient rainfall. Studies show that around the time of Mtoto's burial, rainfall increased in pulses, nourishing vegetation on the coast. This local humidity may explain why communities thrived near Pangaya Saidi, combining marine and terrestrial resources. Such cave records complement lake sediments, giving a multi-scalar picture of climate. Together they confirm that humans lived within an environment of fluctuation, neither wholly stable nor wholly hostile. The mysteries of this climate remain significant. Scientists debate how sudden the shifts were. Some evidence suggests abrupt transitions, wet phases ending within decades, forcing rapid adaptation. Others argue for gradual trends over centuries. For human communities, the distinction was crucial. Gradual change allowed time to adjust, to move, to pass knowledge. Abrupt change could mean crisis, requiring resilience beyond ordinary means. Which pattern dominated during Mtoto's life remains uncertain, but both possibilities remind us of the precariousness of human existence under planetary forces. Burial itself can be read against this background. In a world of impermanence, to place a body in soil may have been an act of continuity. Climate erased rivers, reshaped forests, drowned coastlines, yet a grave, fixed memory in place, anchoring identity against change. To wrap, place, and cover a child was to resist the impermanence of environment. It was a statement that some things endure even as climate shifts. In this way, burial was both symbolic and ecological, tying human memory to the stability of Earth amid planetary flux. The lowering of seas also had wider implications. Exposed shelves along the Indian Ocean coast provided rich habitats for shellfish, crabs, and fish. Communities near Pangaya Saidi likely took advantage of these resources, gathering from tidal flats that stretched far beyond today's beaches. But as seas rose and fell, these zones expanded or contracted. Shellfish beds might disappear within a few generations, forcing shifts in diet and movement. Archaeological evidence of shells far inland suggests that people carried marine resources as food and symbols, linking them to the sea even when climates forced them away. Beyond East Africa, planetary changes reshaped migration routes. When seas fell, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait between Africa and Arabia narrowed, making crossing easier. When rains spread into Arabia, deserts greened, opening pathways northward. Such windows of opportunity allowed dispersal beyond Africa, carrying traditions of symbolism and burial into new lands. In this way, the climate that shaped Mtoto's world also shaped humanity's global story. Burial at Pangaya Saidi thus belongs to a chapter not only of local adaptation, but of planetary transformation. Daily life must have felt these rhythms intimately. Storms marked seasons, rivers rose and fell, winds shifted with monsoons, clouds promised rain or drought. Children grew up watching elders read these signs, learning to anticipate scarcity or abundance. Firelight flickered in caves during wet seasons, smoke curling into humid air. In dry times, winds blew dust across savannas, carrying the scent of parched earth. Through all, communities endured, adjusting strategies, holding memory, and marking death with burial. The rhythms of climate became the rhythms of culture. One unresolved scientific mystery concerns the relationship between climate and symbolism. Did environmental stress encourage the use of beads, ochre, and burial as ways of strengthening community bonds? Or did symbolic practices arise independently? Expressions of identity regardless of scarcity? Some researchers argue that symbolic acts were adaptive, binding groups more tightly in times of hardship. Others see them as spontaneous, arising from imagination alone. The truth may be both: symbolism as expression, reinforced by necessity. Mtoto's burial, framed by cycles of climate, suggests that meaning and survival were not separate but intertwined. From a planetary perspective, the burial connects individual mortality with cosmic cycles. A child rests in soil shaped by monsoons, on a coast extended by glacial seas, beneath skies governed by orbital tilt. Each layer of environment echoes in the grave. Shells from the sea, ochre from earth, pollen from shifting vegetation. The silence of the burial holds within it the vastness of planetary change. In remembering Mtoto, we remember not only a life but a world governed by cycles beyond human control. Step by step, science reconstructs these rhythms. Ice cores from Greenland record global temperatures. Marine sediments in the Arabian Sea trace monsoon strength. Lake beds in East Africa preserve pollen and dust. Together, they form a symphony of evidence converging on the time of Mtoto's burial. The story they tell is not of stability but of flux, and within that flux, humans carved meaning, adapted diet, traveled new paths, and buried their dead with care. The grave at Panga Ya Saidi is therefore not only a human act, but a planetary one, inscribed within Earth's cycles of ice and rain. The act of burial, seen through the grave of Mtoto at Panga Ya Saidi, carries significance beyond its physical traces. To inter a body is to create memory, to transform loss into continuity, and to mark death as an event that matters to the living. For archaeologists, the child's burial provides one of the clearest windows into how early Homo sapiens began to handle the mysteries of mortality. For the community that carried it out, the meaning was likely both practical and symbolic, a way of caring for the body, but also of preserving ties that extended beyond life itself. In many ways, burial represents a turning point in human behavior. Animals grieve, elephants linger around bones, and some primates mourn dead infants. Yet only humans are known to dig pits, wrap bodies, and cover them with soil. These gestures speak of intention, foresight, and recognition of identity that continues after breath ends. In placing Mtoto beneath earth, the community acknowledged that the child remained part of them, even in death. Memory was not left to fade, it was fixed in soil and stone. The grave also suggests an awareness of time. To bury is to act not just for the present, but for the future. It prevents scavengers from disturbing remains, but it also creates a place that endures. The cave floor, once altered, became a marker of permanence. Those who returned to the cave in later seasons may have remembered the burial, even if no monument marked the spot. In this way, burial linked community memory to a specific place, weaving human stories into landscapes. One lesser-known detail lies in the way bones were preserved in position. The careful arrangement implies that the body was not simply left to decay but managed with care. Wrapping, bedding, and positioning all suggest knowledge that death required ritualized action. Anthropologists interpret such acts as signs of cultural buffering, strategies to cope with grief and maintain social cohesion. By performing burial, the community reaffirmed bonds among the living, showing that care did not end with death. The meaning of burial also extends to how humans conceptualized identity. A 2-year-old child may not have been a provider, hunter, or toolmaker. Yet the community invested labor in burial, treating the child as worthy of memory. This reflects recognition that personhood is not tied solely to function. It is inherent, part of belonging to the group. Such recognition forms the root of social values that persist in humanity today. The idea that even the youngest or most vulnerable deserve care in death as in life. Mystery surrounds the emotions that may have accompanied the act. Did mourners speak words, sing, or remain silent? Did they mark their own bodies with ochre, or carry tokens of remembrance? These cannot be known. What can be inferred is the collective nature of the act. A burial requires effort from multiple individuals, digging, preparing, wrapping, and covering. This collective labor suggests shared recognition of death and shared responsibility for memory. Grief was not isolated but communal. On a planetary scale, the emergence of burial fits into a broader pattern of symbolic behavior appearing across continents. Around the same period, Neanderthals in Europe were interring their dead, sometimes with grave goods, in the Levant. Both Homo sapiens and Neanderthals left burials in caves. The convergence of these practices points to a fundamental human capacity, the ability to mark death with ritual. Whether this capacity arose independently in multiple lineages or through cultural transmission remains debated. Yet the pattern underscores that burial is not an accident of one group, but a threshold crossed by humanity as a whole. At Panga Ya Saidi, the child's grave forms part of a symbolic landscape already rich with meaning. Shell beads, ochre, and ornaments nearby show that people engaged in acts of identity and communication. Burial extends this symbolic world into the realm of mortality. It demonstrates that meaning was not limited to life but carried beyond it. In doing so, it reveals how communities began to weave narrative threads across generations, anchoring memory in both objects and places. Daily life may have reinforced this symbolic continuity. Children grew up seeing elders wear beads, paint skin, and shape tools. When death occurred, those same symbolic practices may have framed the burial. Wrapping a child in leaves or hide echoed the wrapping of ornaments on bodies. Placing the child in earth paralleled the way beads were carried inland from the sea, gestures of continuity linking life, death, and landscape. In this way, burial became part of a larger cultural system that extended far beyond the pit itself. One unresolved question is whether burial at this time carried spiritual significance as we understand it. Did people imagine afterlife, spirits, or ancestors? Or was burial primarily a way of caring for the living by managing the dead? Archaeologists cannot answer definitively. Some argue that burial implies belief in life after death, while others caution that such ideas cannot be assumed. What can be said is that burial reflects concern, memory, and continuity, whether or not spiritual concepts were present. It is a bridge between individuals and communities, between life and the enduring landscape. The resilience of burial is notable. Across time, as climates shifted and communities moved, the act of placing bodies in soil or cave persisted. In part, this may reflect practicality. Burial removes risk of scavengers and disease, but its persistence also speaks to symbolic strength. Even when resources were scarce, communities still invested labor in burial. This suggests that memory and identity were seen as essential, not optional. To live as a human group was to mark death with ritual. From the perspective of Mtoto's community, the burial may also have reinforced bonds with place. By interring the child in the cave, they inscribed meaning into landscape. The cave became more than shelter. It became a site of memory. Later generations visiting the cave might recall the child, even if only faintly. Such places demarked by burial could become anchors of identity. In a world of shifting climates and migrations, such anchors helped communities maintain continuity. Planetary forces again frame this act. Burial is an intimate gesture, yet it occurs within cycles of glaciation, rainfall, and sea level change. The soil that covered Mtoto was shaped by monsoon rains, the cave by limestone erosion over millennia, the coast by seas lowered by ice sheets far away. Burial thus connects human care to geological time. It is a reminder that humanity's symbolic acts are woven into Earth's larger rhythms. Step by step, archaeologists bring this meaning to light. They analyze sediments, reconstruct posture, and compare practices across regions. Each fragment adds to the picture: a head supported on bedding, ribs collapsing within a shroud, soil filled with subtle traces. These details combine into a narrative of care, identity, and continuity. They show that burial was not incidental, but deliberate, a choice embedded in cultural practice. The grave of Mtoto stands as the earliest known in Africa, but it is unlikely to have been the only one. Many others must have existed, lost to erosion, soil chemistry, and time. The survival of this one is chance, yet its significance is immense. It confirms that by 78,000 years ago, humans were already treating death with care, memory, and meaning. It ties early Homo sapiens to a tradition that extends through millennia, linking us to ancestors across continents. In the stillness of Panga Ya Saidi, burial emerges as both memory and meaning. It bridges life and death, individual and community, local act and planetary cycle. It tells us that long before monuments or written words, humans were already inscribing continuity in soil. The child's grave is not only a testimony of loss, but of belonging. It reminds us that from the very beginning, humanity faced mortality not with indifference, but with care that endures through time. The burial of Mtoto in coastal Kenya does not stand in isolation. Across other regions of the Old World, humans and their close relatives were also laying their dead into the ground. The parallels between the African child's grave and burials of Neanderthals in Europe and the Levant invite comparison. They raise profound questions about whether symbolic treatment of the dead arose independently among different human lineages, or whether ideas passed between groups as they encountered one another across shifting landscapes. The Neanderthal record is particularly rich. In Shanidar Cave in northern Iraq, several skeletons of Neanderthals were discovered within shallow pits, some accompanied by clusters of pollen grains that may indicate flowers placed with the dead. Though debated, the interpretation suggests that Neanderthals were not indifferent to mortality. At La Chapelle-aux-Saints in France, a Neanderthal adult was found in a deliberate depression, limbs flexed and bones undisturbed. In the Levant, at sites such as Kibara and Amud, further burials add to the evidence. Together, they show a repeated pattern. Neanderthals sometimes buried their dead, a practice resembling that of early Homo sapiens. The similarities are striking. In both Neanderthal and Homo sapiens burials, bodies were placed with care, sometimes flexed, sometimes cushioned. Soil disturbances reveal deliberate digging. Bones remain in articulation, suggesting protection from scavengers. Such parallels indicate that symbolic concern for the dead was not exclusive to one lineage. Burial may have been a shared capacity across human species, an emergent property of large brains, social cohesion, and recognition of identity. Yet differences also emerge. Neanderthal burials often lack ornaments, beads, or pigment. They appear pragmatic, emphasizing protection rather than display. By contrast, many Homo sapiens burials, especially later ones, include grave goods, shell beads, ochre, tools, even figurines. At Panga ya Saidi, Mtoto's grave contained no clear offerings, aligning it more closely with the Neanderthal pattern. Still, the surrounding cave deposits included shells and ochre, suggesting that symbolic items were part of daily life, even if not placed with the child. This ambiguity highlights the difficulty of interpretation. The absence of objects may reflect cultural choice, preservation bias, or both. One lesser-known detail comes from the site of Kafse in Israel, where Homo sapiens burials more than 90,000 years old contained red ochre and deer antlers placed with bodies. These early offerings predate Mtoto's burial and show that symbolic treatment of the dead was not uniform. Some communities included ornaments, others did not. Such diversity suggests that burial practices varied widely across regions and times, shaped by local traditions, resources, and beliefs. Mtoto's grave therefore represents one thread within a tapestry of practices that spanned continents. The unresolved mystery is how these practices relate to each other. Did Homo sapiens in Africa and Neanderthals in Europe develop burial independently, converging on similar solutions to mortality? Or did ideas spread through encounters, with groups learning from each other during episodes of contact and interbreeding? Genetic evidence shows that Homo sapiens and Neanderthals interbred multiple times. Such contact may have extended to cultural exchange. Yet, proving transmission of ideas is nearly impossible with current evidence. Archaeology offers parallels, but not certainty. The debate continues, leaving open the possibility that symbolic treatment of the dead arose more than once in human history. On a planetary scale, these burials occurred during glacial cycles that shaped environments across Africa and Eurasia. Ice sheets lowered seas, opening migration routes. Rainfall belts shifted, allowing corridors of green through deserts. In these intervals, populations expanded, moved, and met. Burial practices, whether in Africa or Europe, unfolded within this broader ecological context. They were not isolated cultural acts, but responses embedded in planetary rhythms. As climates changed, groups sought stability in ritual. To bury was to create permanence in a world of flux. The comparison between Mtoto and Neanderthal burials also raises questions about cognition. Both groups made tools, used fire, and adapted to diverse environments. Both recognized the utility of pigments, though in different ways. Burial adds to this list of shared capacities. It demonstrates that recognition of mortality was not unique to Homo sapiens. Instead, it may have been part of what it meant to be human, broadly defined. If so, then Mtoto's grave and Neanderthal graves belong to the same continuum, evidence of a shared human heritage rooted deep in prehistory. Daily life may have shaped these practices differently. For Neanderthals living in colder climates, burial may have been practical, protecting camps from scavengers. For Homo sapiens in tropical Africa, burial may have been more symbolic, anchoring memory in place. Yet the gestures themselves converge: the careful positioning of bodies, the filling of pits, the protection of remains. In both cases, community effort was required. Burial, whether pragmatic or symbolic, expressed cohesion. It demonstrated that death mattered to the group, not just the individual. One unresolved question is why burials are so rare. If both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens practiced them, why do archaeologists find so few? Preservation is one answer. Acid soils destroy bone. Erosion erases pits. Scavengers scatter remains. But cultural variability may also play a role. Not all groups may have chosen burial. Some may have left bodies exposed, cremated them, or practiced rituals that leave no trace. Burial, then, represents only one strand of a wider set of mortuary behaviors. Mtoto's grave is precious, not because it is unique, but because it survived. Comparisons also highlight scale. Neanderthal burials often involved adults, while some of the earliest Homo sapiens burials involved children. The choice to bury a child may reveal differences in how groups valued life stages. To Neanderthals, adults who contributed directly to survival may have been more likely to receive burial. To Homo sapiens, children, though not yet providers, were recognized as persons within community. Such differences, if real, hint at diverse ways of conceptualizing identity. They remind us that humanity's symbolic acts were not monolithic, but varied across lineages and regions. On a planetary perspective, the convergence of burial across human groups underscores the universality of mortality. Whether in African caves, European shelters, or Levantine valleys, communities confronted the same reality. Life ends. Their responses, though varied, shared a recognition that death required action. Burial was one such action, a means of bridging life and memory. In this sense, Mtoto's grave is not an anomaly, but part of a broader human condition. It shows that long before modern religions or philosophies, humans of many kinds grappled with the same mystery. Step by step, archaeologists continue to compare sites. They measure soil, analyze pollen, date bones, and map postures. Each burial adds to a growing archive of human responses to death. Mtoto's grave joins this archive. Standing alongside Shanidar, La Chapelle au Saint, Kafse, and others. Together, they tell a story of shared humanity, diverse, adaptive, symbolic. They show that the capacity to care for the dead, to remember, and to mark continuity is as ancient as humanity itself. In the silence of Pangaya Saidi, the child's burial connects to these distant sites. Though oceans and deserts separated them, the gestures were alike. Bodies laid carefully, pits filled deliberately, memory preserved in earth. Across continents, humans acted with similar concern. This convergence speaks not of coincidence but of shared capacities that define what it means to be human. The grave of Mtoto, earliest known in Africa, thus belongs not only to local history, but to a global story of burial, continuity, and care. The fragile bones of Mtoto, lifted carefully from the cave sediments of Panga Yasaidi, carry knowledge far beyond their small size. Though they belong to a child only 2 or 3 years of age, their preservation grants rare insight into the anatomy, growth, and health of early Homo sapiens. Most skeletal remains from this period are fragmentary, scattered, or absent altogether. Acid soils dissolve bone, tropical rains wash away deposits, scavengers scatter remains. That a partial skeleton survived for nearly 80 millennia is extraordinary. It provides scientists with a rare chance to examine how children grew, how their bones developed, and how their lives unfolded within the shifting environments of late Pleistocene Africa. When the remains were first studied, specialists noted the curvature of the cranial fragments. The rounded vault, delicate and thin, matched the anatomy of modern humans rather than archaic hominins. Dental analysis confirmed age, deciduous teeth in place, permanent teeth just beginning to emerge. These details place Mtoto firmly within our species. The bones whisper that 78,000 years ago, children looked much like children do today. Small jaws, rounded skulls, soft growth plates awaiting further development. Yet the skeleton also records hardships. Growth lines within tooth enamel show interruptions, brief pauses when stress or illness slowed development. Such markers reveal that Mtoto likely faced periods of fever or malnutrition, events common in foraging communities where food and health were precarious. In this way, the remains provide not only a picture of anatomy, but also of lived experience. They remind us that life in deep prehistory was fragile, especially for the young, yet communities endured by pooling knowledge and care. Archaeologists emphasize the rarity of child burials. Adults are more commonly found, their bones larger and more resistant to decay. The survival of a child's skeleton offers perspective on age and vulnerability. It shows that mortality among the young was marked with care, not indifference. To recover Mtoto's bones is to glimpse a community's decision to remember the smallest among them, preserving personhood even when life was short. The study of these bones required careful methods. Rather than removing each piece individually, excavators lifted blocks of sediment containing fragile remains. In laboratories, micro-CT scanning allowed scientists to reconstruct posture without disturbing delicate elements. Virtual imaging revealed how ribs collapsed inward, how vertebrae aligned, how limbs folded. These reconstructions confirmed that the child had been placed deliberately in a flexed position, wrapped and cushioned before burial. Such technologies demonstrate how modern science can read faint signals invisible to the eye, retrieving gestures that occurred tens of thousands of years ago. One lesser-known detail concerns the middle ear bones. In Mtoto's skeleton, the tiny ossicles, the malleus, incus, and stapes, were preserved, an exceedingly rare occurrence. These bones, smaller than grains of rice, carry sound in life and almost never survive in death. Their presence here offers rare opportunity to study hearing capacity in early Homo sapiens children. Analyses suggest auditory abilities very similar to modern humans, reinforcing the view that by this time our species already possessed the sensory capacities that support language. These minuscule bones are hidden in soil for millennia, connect us intimately to a child's perception of sound in a prehistoric world. Mystery also lingers in what the skeleton does not show. Bones preserve structure but not voice, memory, or identity. They cannot tell what the child saw, heard, or felt. They do not reveal the cause of death. Was it illness, accident, or malnutrition? No trauma is visible, but absence of evidence is not certainty. Many childhood diseases leave no skeletal trace. Thus, the cause of Mtoto's death remains unknown, a silence that archaeology cannot fill. This uncertainty is part of the story, reminding us of the limits of knowledge and the vastness of what is lost. On a planetary scale, the survival of such fragile bones underscores the rarity of preservation in tropical environments. In Europe, cooler climates and caves often yield skeletons tens of thousands of years old. In Africa, warmth, rain, and soil acidity destroy bone quickly. That Mtoto's skeleton endured at all is an accident of geology. The limestone cave provided shelter, buffering against acidity and erosion. Sediments accumulated slowly, covering the grave, sealing bones within a protective cocoon. This chance survival provides a glimpse of what is otherwise hidden: the bodies of countless individuals who lived and died without leaving a trace. The study of Mtoto's bones also contributes to understanding human growth. Comparisons with modern children suggest that developmental patterns were already much the same. Tooth eruption followed familiar schedules. Bone proportions matched expectations for a 2 to 3-year-old today. This continuity demonstrates that Homo sapiens physiology has remained remarkably stable over tens of millennia. Our ancestors, 78,000 years ago, were not merely similar, but anatomically modern in ways that resonate clearly with us. Daily life, glimpsed through bones, appears fragile but resilient. Growth lines in teeth mark times of illness, yet the child lived beyond them, carried by community care. The very survival to age 2 or 3 shows that nourishment, protection, and teaching sustained life, even in challenging conditions. These bones, though silent, speak of love and labor, of mothers and fathers, siblings and elders who ensured that children grew as best they could. Burial, then, was not only ritual, but an extension of this care into death. One unresolved question concerns the relationship between anatomy and culture. Did communities perceive children as individuals in the same way we do today? Burial suggests recognition of personhood, yet how that identity was framed remains unclear. Were children seen as full members from birth, or did rituals of initiation mark stages of belonging? The grave of Mtoto suggests that even the youngest were valued as members of community, but the specifics of cultural conception remain hidden. The skeleton also anchors studies of ancient population history. Though DNA has not yet been retrieved from Mtoto's bones, other sites show that genetic material can survive in sediments. If future research recovers DNA, it may reveal connections between this child's lineage and broader human populations. Already, genetic studies show deep diversity within Africa at this time, with populations branching and reconnecting. Mtoto's bones could one day contribute to this map, situating a single child within the web of human ancestry. On the scale of human evolution, such discoveries help resolve debates about the emergence of modern human traits. By 78,000 years ago, Homo sapiens already exhibited symbolic behavior, flexible diets, and global dispersal. The anatomy of a child reinforces this picture. Growth and development mirrored those of living humans. Sensory capacities were intact, and burial practices revealed social depth. In Mtoto's small skeleton lies confirmation that our species had already become what it is, both biologically and culturally. Step by step, archaeologists and anthropologists reconstruct this story. They measure enamel growth lines, scan tiny bones, compare limb proportions, and analyze sediment chemistry. Each detail, though technical, builds toward a larger narrative that a child lived in coastal Kenya nearly 80 millennia ago, grew much as children do today, faced illness and hardship, and was buried with care by community. These bones, fragile yet enduring, testify to continuity between past and present, between deep prehistory and modern humanity. In the stillness of the cave, the skeleton rests. Its fragility is striking, bones like paper, teeth barely emerged, ossicles small as seeds. Yet from such delicate remains emerges a vast story of survival, growth, and care. Mtoto's bones confirm that even the youngest were part of humanity's shared history, their lives and deaths woven into the rhythms of climate, community, and time. The grave holds not only a child, but knowledge that bridges across ages, connecting us to the enduring resilience of our species. The meaning of Mtoto's burial has sparked careful debate among archaeologists and anthropologists. Was the act primarily symbolic, an expression of belief and identity? Or was it practical, aimed at removing a body from sight and smell? The evidence lies somewhere between soil traces, posture, and possible wrappings indicate deliberate care, but the absence of beads, ochre, or tools in the grave complicates interpretation. This tension between symbolic and pragmatic remains one of the central questions in the study of early mortuary behavior. Symbolism is difficult to define in deep prehistory. To call an act symbolic is to claim it carries meaning beyond immediate function. A bead strung as ornament has no nutritional value. Its significance lies in identity or social recognition. Burial, too, is symbolic if it reflects recognition of the dead as persons whose memory endures. Yet burial can also be practical, serving to protect the living from disease or scavengers. Archaeologists must weigh these possibilities with caution, balancing evidence with restraint. At Panga ya Saidi, the deliberate wrapping of the child suggests intention. The supported head, the flexed limbs, the filled pit, all indicate more than abandonment. Yet the absence of objects complicates matters. In later burials, grave goods clearly indicate ritual. Ochre sprinkled, tools placed, beads sewn into clothing. At Mtoto's grave, none of these appear. Some scholars interpret this as minimal symbolism, care expressed through placement alone, without additional objects. Others suggest that perishable offerings may once have been present, now lost to time. Leaves, food, or pigments could vanish without trace, leaving only bones. The truth remains uncertain. One lesser-known detail emerges from microscopic analysis of sediments near the grave. Some grains carried faint traces of iron oxide, consistent with ochre. The evidence is too weak to prove deliberate use, but its possibility lingers. If ochre was present, even lightly, then the burial fits more clearly into symbolic traditions. Ochre use is widespread in Middle Stone Age Africa, often linked to body painting or symbolic marking. Its potential presence here strengthens the case for meaning beyond practicality, yet ambiguity remains, reminding us of the fragility of interpretation. The debate over symbolism also intersects with questions of cognition. Symbolic behavior requires imagination, the ability to see one thing as standing for another. To bury a child may represent not just disposal, but recognition that life has passed, and memory remains. If this interpretation holds, then Mtoto's community demonstrated cognitive capacities equivalent to modern humans. Some scholars argue that such capacities emerged gradually, with burial among the earliest expressions. Others see symbolism as fully developed by this time, part of a suite of behaviors that included beads, ochre, and ornaments. The distinction matters, for it shapes how we view the timeline of human cultural evolution. Mystery surrounds whether burial practices were shared widely across Africa at this time. Few burials survive, leaving gaps in knowledge. Did communities across the continent bury their dead in similar ways, or was Panga ya Saidi unique? Preservation bias clouds the answer. Tropical soils dissolve bone quickly, erasing graves. It is possible that burial was widespread, but only Mtoto's skeleton endured. Alternatively, burial may have been rare, a cultural experiment not yet common. Archaeologists cannot yet decide. The scarcity of evidence leaves the debate open, one of the enduring mysteries of early Homo sapiens. On a planetary scale, the question of symbolism links to broader patterns of human behavior. Burial, beads, and ochre appear around the same time as migrations outward from Africa. Some scholars suggest that symbolic behavior provided an adaptive advantage, strengthening cohesion in mobile groups. Symbols, whether in ornaments or rituals, helped bind communities, ensuring trust and cooperation. Such cohesion would have been crucial in unstable climates, when groups needed to move, share resources and survive together. If burial was part of this symbolic toolkit, then its significance extended beyond the grave, shaping resilience at the scale of populations. Comparisons with Neanderthal burials sharpen the debate. Neanderthals sometimes buried their dead, but interpretations vary. Some researchers argue their burials were purely practical, with no symbolic meaning. Others see evidence of ritual, flowers, pigment, or tools placed with bodies. The overlap with Homo sapiens practices raises questions. Were symbolic behaviors shared across species, or did Homo sapiens develop them more fully? The Panga ya Saidi burial, while ambiguous, supports the view that symbolism was already well developed within our lineage, anchoring meaning in the African homeland. Daily life may provide clues. Communities at Panga ya Saidi wore beads, used ochre, and exchanged ornaments. Symbolism was already part of identity in life. It is reasonable to imagine that death too was framed in symbolic ways, even if objects did not survive. Burial, then, was not separate from daily culture, but embedded within it. Children grew up watching adults adorn themselves, paint with pigment, and carry ornaments. When a child died, burial likely echoed these practices, extending symbolism into death. Even if the grave appears simple, it was part of a symbolic landscape already in place. One unresolved question is how communities experienced memory. Did they return to the grave, recall the child, or use the site for ritual? Or was burial final, the place left behind as groups moved onward? Archaeology cannot provide answers. No monuments or repeated layers mark the site as a cemetery. The burial seems solitary, not part of a larger cluster. Perhaps it was a unique act, remembered briefly and then forgotten. Or perhaps memory persisted orally, stories passed across generations even without material markers. The silence of the cave leaves this question open. Planetary rhythms again contextualize the debate. Burial occurred during glacial cycles that reshaped landscapes. In unstable environments, Symbols may have provided anchors. They allowed communities to maintain continuity when rivers shifted, forests vanished, and coastlines drowned. To bury was to create permanence in a world of change. Symbolism was thus not only expression, but survival, an anchor in the face of instability. The grave at Panga Saidi embodies this dual role, at once practical and symbolic, anchored in earth and memory alike. Step by step, scholars weigh evidence, they measure soil chemistry, analyze bone posture, compare practices across sites. Each piece adds nuance, yet certainty remains elusive. Was Mtoto's burial symbolic, pragmatic, or both? The debate continues, but what is clear is that the act was deliberate. Wrapping, placing, and covering a body require thought, cooperation, and care. Whether symbolic in our sense or not, such gestures mark a threshold in human behavior, the recognition that death requires ritual action. The silence of the grave captures this threshold. It speaks of memory, identity, and community, but also of ambiguity, the limits of what evidence can show. To interpret Mtoto's burial is to walk a line between caution and imagination, between evidence and possibility. What endures is the act itself, a deliberate interment 78,000 years ago. Whether symbolic or pragmatic, it tells us that humans by this time were already shaping death with intention. And in that intention lies the root of symbolism, the bridge between body and meaning that defines humanity across time. The grave of Mtoto, though silent, is deeply connected to the story told in our genes. DNA is a record of memory, carried not in objects or soil, but in molecules passed from parent to child. It is through this genetic archive that scientists trace humanity's deep ancestry, mapping where groups moved, how they split and reunited, and which traditions traveled across generations. Even though DNA has not yet been recovered from Mtoto's bones, the child's burial in coastal Kenya can be placed within this wider genetic framework. It belongs to lineages whose echoes are still present in living Africans today. Modern genomes show that Africa holds the greatest diversity of all human populations. This diversity is the result of tens of thousands of years of branching and reconnecting lineages. Around the time Mtoto lived, coastal communities were already part of this mosaic. Some groups stayed close to the sea, others moved inland to forests or savannas, and still others followed rivers northward toward Arabia. Each group carried unique combinations of genes, forming a braided pattern of ancestry. The burial of one child is therefore more than a local event. It is a window onto the richness of humanity's genetic past. Archaeologists hope that sediment DNA might one day be recovered from Panga Saidi. At other sites, genetic fragments have survived in soil even when bones held none. If such traces emerge, they could reveal how closely related Mtoto's group was to modern coastal populations. Already, evidence suggests continuity. Groups in East Africa today still carry ancient lineages that diverged more than 50,000 years ago. The child buried in the cave likely belonged to one of these enduring lineages, a thread still woven into the fabric of humanity. One lesser-known detail is found in the study of hunter-gatherer populations in Africa, such as the Hadza of Tanzania or the San of southern Africa. Their DNA preserves lineages that diverged earlier than most others, perhaps more than 100,000 years ago. These groups are not direct descendants of Mtoto's community, yet they illustrate how ancient diversity survived in Africa despite countless shifts in climate and movement. Mtoto's people may have carried similar deep lineages, now mingled into modern populations, but still detectable in fragments of DNA. The unresolved mystery is how far such coastal groups spread. Genetic evidence shows that all humans outside Africa descend from populations that left the continent about 60 to 70,000 years ago. Did Mtoto's relatives take part in this great dispersal? If they did, then their genetic signatures still live in people across the globe. If not, then their lineage may remain only within Africa, absorbed into the complex web of ancestry that continues to define the continent. Without DNA, the answer cannot yet be given, but the possibility links the Kenyan cave to the global story of humanity. Planetary shifts created the opportunities for such dispersals. Glacial cycles lowered seas, narrowing the Bab el-Mandeb Strait between Africa and Arabia. At times, crossing would have been no wider than a few kilometers, making movement possible for small groups. Rainfall belts expanded northward, greening deserts and filling lakes. These intervals allowed populations to expand, carrying with them genes, tools, and symbolic traditions. When climates dried again, some groups vanished, while others survived in refuges. Each cycle left its mark in DNA, shaping the mosaic we inherit today. Daily life gave these genetic exchanges their context. Each child born carried strands from many ancestors, recombined anew. In this way, genetic continuity was sustained without conscious effort. Communities may not have understood DNA, but they understood kinship, parenthood, and inheritance. The child at Pangayasaidi embodied such continuity, carrying forward the legacy of forebears who had survived droughts, hunted game, gathered shellfish, and shared firelight. Though the skeleton itself tells only of death, the genes it once contained linked that child to countless others, across both past and future. One unresolved question in genetics is the role of ghost lineages. In Africa, DNA from living people shows traces of interbreeding with ancient human groups that have not yet been identified in the fossil record. These unknown lineages diverged from Homo sapiens hundreds of thousands of years ago, but still contributed fragments of DNA to our ancestry. Could Mtoto's people have carried such traces? If so, the child's lineage was not purely Homo sapiens as we think of it today, but already a blend of encounters with earlier populations. The absence of direct DNA prevents certainty, but the possibility deepens the mystery of who we are. Comparisons with populations outside Africa reinforce the point. All non-Africans today carry a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA, and some in Asia and Oceania carry Denisovan DNA as well. These signatures are the result of interbreeding after dispersal. By contrast, Africans like Mtoto's community lived before such encounters. Their DNA would have been entirely African, reflecting the deep diversity of the continent without admixture from other hominin species. In this way, the child's burial anchors us in a time before humanity became a global, mixed species. On a planetary scale, genes serve as timekeepers. Mutations occur at regular rates, leaving markers that can be measured like rings in a tree. These markers allow scientists to trace back when populations split, how long they remained apart, and when they merged again. Through such methods, we know that African populations around the time of Mtoto's burial were already highly structured. They were not one people, but many, connected by exchange, yet separated by distance. The burial is thus both specific and universal. A child laid to rest in one cave, belonging to a lineage woven into a much larger web. Daily rhythms of foraging, hunting, and gathering sustained this genetic continuity. Each meal, each birth, each migration carried forward the lineage. When death came, burial ensured that identity was remembered even as genes moved on through the living. Symbolism and biology worked together. Ornaments carried social meaning, while DNA carried biological continuity. Both bound the past to the future, ensuring that humanity endured despite climate, scarcity, and loss. Step by step, scientists unravel this story. They extract DNA from teeth and soil, compare genomes across continents, and align genetic data with archaeological finds. The picture that emerges is one of complexity. Humans were diverse, mobile, and interconnected long before written history. Mtoto's burial fits into this picture, reminding us that every grave belongs to a broader genetic context. Even if the child's DNA is lost, its echoes remain in the diversity of Africa and, perhaps, in the ancestry of all who trace their roots to that continent. In the quiet of Pangaya Saidi, the child rests in soil shaped by monsoons and seas. Around the grave, shells whisper of journeys, ochre hints at color, and bones recall fragile life. Within the body once lay genes that tied the child to ancestors stretching back hundreds of thousands of years, and to descendants who still live today. Though we may never read that DNA, we know its story. Continuity amid change, diversity amid movement, resilience amid uncertainty. The burial is thus not only a testimony of care, but of connection, linking one child to the immense river of human ancestry that still flows. From the mouth of Pangaya Saidi Cave, the horizon of the Indian Ocean stretches vast and unbroken. Today, waves crash against coral reefs and beaches, but 78,000 years ago the view was different. Lower sea levels had drawn the shoreline outward, exposing tidal flats and lagoons where mangroves grew thick and shellfish flourished. To stand at the cave and look east was to see not just water, but an endless expanse of possibility, a surface that reflected the sun by day and the stars by night. For the community that buried Mtoto, the ocean was both resource and mystery, shaping daily life and imagination alike. The sea offered food that was both reliable and abundant. Shellfish, crabs, and fish could be gathered with little risk, providing protein when hunting on land was uncertain. Archaeological layers in the cave contain fragments of shells carried inland, evidence of harvests taken from tidal flats. Such resources may have been crucial during dry phases or when inland game grew scarce. The coast provided resilience, a buffer against climate variability. To live near the ocean was to have insurance, a steady source of sustenance no matter how savannas shifted. But the ocean was more than food. It was a pathway. From East Africa's coast, islands can be seen offshore, and further beyond lies Arabia. Lower seas shortened these distances, narrowing channels and exposing land. Though no direct evidence shows boats at this time, people surely watched the tides, currents, and horizon. They may have wondered what lay across the water, just as later generations did when they crossed to new continents. The Indian Ocean was both barrier and bridge, a surface that invited curiosity even as it imposed limits. One lesser-known detail comes from isotopic analysis of shells at nearby sites. Some were found far inland, carried more than 100 kilometers from the shore. This suggests exchange or travel between coastal and interior groups. Shells may have served as ornaments, symbols of connection to the sea. To wear them inland was to carry the horizon on one's body, a reminder of the vast waters beyond forests and savannas. Such movement of shells shows that the ocean's influence extended far beyond the shoreline, reaching deep into social and symbolic life. The burial of Mtoto in a coastal cave ties memory to this horizon. The child was placed in soil shaped by tides and monsoons, in a chamber where the sound of the ocean could still be heard faintly. To bury a child here was to anchor community within a landscape dominated by the sea. It created continuity between daily life, gathering shellfish, watching tides, and symbolic life, honoring the dead. The grave thus reflects not only mortality, but also the setting of life at the edge of ocean vastness. Mystery surrounds how these early communities perceived the sea. Did they imagine spirits in the waves? Did the horizon represent the edge of the world, or simply a vast hunting ground? Archaeology cannot answer, yet the transport of shells, the choice of a coastal cave, and the persistence of symbolism suggest that the ocean carried meanings beyond sustenance. It was part of cultural identity, woven into how groups saw themselves and their place in the world. On a planetary scale, the ocean linked regions across thousands of kilometers. Monsoon winds drove seasonal currents, shaping rainfall and vegetation inland. The same winds that carried rain to forests also sculpted tides along the coast. To live at Panga Yasaidi was to be connected to a system larger than the cave or even the continent. The ocean tied climate, food, and imagination together. It was a constant presence, reflecting both stability and change. Daily life must have unfolded in rhythm with tides. Low water revealed shellfish beds. High water brought schools of fish closer to shore. Storms reshaped beaches, depositing driftwood and shells. Children grew up learning these rhythms, imitating elders as they gathered mollusks or cast nets of plant fiber. Firelight in the cave would have mingled with the sound of waves, creating a sensory backdrop where land and sea blended. Against this rhythm, burial inserted another kind of continuity, anchoring memory in a place where natural cycles were most visible. One unresolved question concerns the role of the ocean in human dispersal. Did groups like those at Panga Yasaidi eventually cross waters to Arabia? Some scholars argue that coastal routes were central to the Great Migration out of Africa, providing steady food and clear paths along shorelines. Others suggest inland routes were more significant. The burial itself cannot answer, but the cave's location hints at the importance of coasts. Communities here lived with the sea daily, and familiarity with tides and horizons may have prepared them for journeys far beyond. The symbolism of the ocean also intersects with burial. To bury in soil near the sea is to mark death within a landscape of vastness. The horizon embodies continuity, stretching beyond sight, much as memory stretches beyond life. For a community facing mortality, the sea may have provided metaphor, even if unspoken. Its endlessness mirrored human continuity. Its tides echoed cycles of life and death. Whether consciously or not, the ocean framed burial with meaning, situating loss within a setting of enduring expanse. On a planetary perspective, the Indian Ocean was part of Earth's climate engine. Its surface absorbed heat, drove monsoons, and shaped rainfall across Africa and Asia. The very storms that watered forests and rivers also shaped daily life at the coast. Burial at Panga Yasaidi thus occurred within a nexus of planetary forces, orbital rhythms controlling climate, monsoon winds sculpting seasons, and tides shaping resources. The ocean was both immediate and cosmic, touching every aspect of existence. The lesser-known role of mangroves deserves mention. During lower seas, vast mangrove swamps lined the coast, serving as nurseries for fish and as sources of wood and fiber. Archaeological hints suggest that people gathered in these habitats, collecting shellfish and perhaps using mangrove poles for construction. If Mtoto's community made wrappings for burial, mangrove leaves or fibers may have been part of them. Though unpreserved, such materials tie burial indirectly to the sea's ecosystems, reinforcing the link between mortality and marine landscapes. Step by step, archaeology reveals these connections. Shell beads in caves show movement of marine objects inland. Soil chemistry records monsoon patterns. Sediment cores from offshore capture pollen blown from forests, linking land and sea. Together, they paint a picture of communities living at the boundary of two worlds. Burial at Panga ya Saidi is part of this picture, a symbolic act framed by the ocean's endless horizon. In the stillness of the cave today, the sea remains visible. Its vastness continues to dominate the view, just as it did 78,000 years ago. To imagine the burial is to imagine not only a child placed in earth, but a community standing at the threshold of land and water, listening to waves, watching tides, and sensing the immensity beyond. The horizon holds memory, linking local acts to planetary cycles, daily survival to enduring symbolism. Mtoto's grave thus belongs to the ocean as much as to the earth, a testimony of humanity's bond with horizons that never end. Within the limestone chamber of Panga ya Saidi, the silence around Mtoto's grave endures. The child's bones lie curled in the soil, wrapped and cushioned by hands that lived 78,000 years ago. Time has stripped away the voices, the gestures, the songs or silences that may have accompanied burial, yet the act itself remains. It is stillness made permanent, a trace of human concern that has lasted far longer than the lives of those who carried it out. In this stillness, we glimpse both continuity and fragility, the persistence of humanity's symbolic care, and the precariousness of its survival in archaeological record. The grave is small, shallow, and unadorned. No beads were left within, no tools, no ochre in visible quantity. Only the body itself, placed deliberately, head supported, limbs flexed. The simplicity makes it powerful. It shows that memory and meaning do not require monuments. A pit in a cave floor, carefully filled, was enough to transform death into continuity. The cave became a container of remembrance, holding silence as securely as it once held firelight and echoes of daily life. Still, interpretation is layered with uncertainty. Did the community return to the grave or move on? Was the burial meant to anchor memory in place or simply to protect the living from decay? Archaeology cannot answer fully, yet even uncertainty carries significance. It reminds us that humanity's earliest symbolic acts are fragile, glimpsed through fragments. What survives is not certainty but possibility, a window through which we can see care expressed in forms that transcend time. One lesser-known detail from the site is the absence of disturbance by animals. In many prehistoric contexts, bones are scattered by scavengers. At Panga ya Saidi, the skeleton remained in articulation. This suggests that the grave was deep enough, or protected enough, to shield it. Such protection implies intention. Those who buried the child wanted the body to remain intact. Whether practical or symbolic, the effect is the same: bones preserved, posture retained, memory anchored. The mystery is why more burials of this age have not been found in Africa. Was Panga ya Saidi exceptional, or are most graves lost to erosion and soil chemistry? Some scholars suggest that burial was more common than evidence indicates, but tropical conditions erased the record. Others argue that deliberate burial was rare, a practice only beginning to emerge. The question remains open. Mtoto's grave is thus both singular and representative, a survivor among countless acts of care that may have vanished forever. On a planetary scale, the grave connects individual mortality with geological permanence. The soil that enclosed the child was formed from limestone deposited millions of years earlier, shaped by oceans that once covered the land. Monsoon rains fell on forests above, washing sediments into the cave. Glacial cycles lowered seas, exposing tidal flats. Against this immense backdrop, the burial was a moment of human intimacy. Yet, through its survival, it bridges scales, from a 2-year-old child to planetary cycles of ice and sea, from a shallow pit to deep time. The stillness of the grave also raises questions about how communities experience time itself. Burial fixes a moment in place. It transforms an event into memory that endures beyond immediate loss. In this sense, burial may have been humanity's first monument, not in stone towers or carvings, but in soil arranged deliberately. It is memory written into earth, subtle yet profound. Such acts foreshadow later traditions, cemeteries, tombs, markers of stone. But at Panga ya Saidi, the act remained simple, unadorned, and powerful in its simplicity. Daily life continued around the cave after burial. Fires burned, shells were gathered, animals hunted, tools made. Generations may have come and gone without disturbing the grave. The child rested beneath, while above, communities endured cycles of rain and drought, abundance and scarcity. Burial thus coexisted with life, reminding the living of continuity even as they moved forward. In this way, the grave bound death to survival, memory to daily rhythm. One unresolved question concerns whether this burial reflects a broader conception of ancestors. Did the community view the dead as continuing presences, guiding or watching? Or was burial focused only on closure, removing the body from sight? The absence of grave goods makes it difficult to know, yet burial itself suggests recognition that death carried significance beyond disposal. Whether spiritual or social, the act transformed absence into presence, anchoring memory in soil. The significance of the grave extends far beyond its size. It demonstrates that by 78,000 years ago, humans in Africa were already shaping death with intention. They were not simply surviving, but creating continuity, recognizing identity, and embedding memory in place. This recognition binds us to them across tens of millennia. The gestures of care are familiar: to lay, to cover, to remember. The continuity is striking, reminding us that humanity's symbolic nature is ancient, not recent. On a planetary perspective, the silence of the grave resonates with universality. Across later ages, in Europe, Asia, and the Americas, humans built tombs, mounds, and cemeteries. Yet the essence was the same: recognition of loss, transformation of death into memory. Mtoto's grave stands at the threshold of this long tradition. One of the earliest known acts of deliberate burial in Africa. It connects to all who came after, linking the first small pit in a cave to pyramids, monuments, and cemeteries around the world. Step by step, scientists draw meaning from this silence. Sediments reveal posture. Chemistry hints at organic wrapping. Comparisons place it within global patterns. Yet beyond evidence lies resonance. The grave reminds us that mortality has always been faced with care. Even in a world of shifting climates, unstable resources, hope, and fragile survival, humans chose to mark death with meaning. The stillness beneath limestone thus becomes not only archaeological data but testimony of humanity itself. In the quiet of Pangaya Saidi today, one can imagine the cave as it was, firelight flickering, ocean horizon beyond, children playing near the entrance, adults shaping stone. Within, a small grave held silence. Above, life went on. The combination of fragility and endurance, bones as delicate as paper, yet memory lasting 78,000 years, defines the significance of the site. It is continuity expressed through stillness, a bridge between fleeting lives and enduring humanity. The story of Mtoto closes not with certainty, but with reflection. The grave holds questions as much as answers. Was it symbolic or practical? Unique or common? Anchored in belief or in care? We cannot know for sure. But we can see the choice. A community decided to dig, to place, to cover, to protect. That choice alone marks the threshold of humanity. It shows that even in the deep past, people recognized that death mattered, and that memory could be written into earth. The story of Mtoto's burial leads us into stillness. A child, wrapped with care, placed in soil, remembered not in words, but in gestures. The cave preserved what the living could not have imagined, that tens of thousands of years later, others would kneel in the same earth, uncovering the faint traces of their act. What endures is not only bone, but intention, the recognition that death deserved care, and that memory could be fixed within place. Much remains unknown. We cannot recover the voices, the songs, or the thoughts of those who stood around the grave. We cannot know whether they believed in spirits, or whether they simply honored loss. We cannot know how many other burials were made, or how many vanished. These mysteries remind us that deep time holds more silence than record, more absence than evidence. Yet, what we do see is enough. A community, 78 millennia ago, carried a child into a cave, dug a pit, wrapped the body, and laid it to rest. Around them, oceans shifted, forests grew and shrank, glaciers advanced far away. Against this vast backdrop, their gesture was small, but it endured. It tells us that even in deep prehistory, humanity was already bound together by care, memory, and continuity. As listeners, we end here, in stillness. The ocean horizon stretches outward, unchanged across ages. The limestone cave remains, holding its silence. And beneath the soil, Mtoto rests, a child whose presence bridges deep time with our own.